In this lesson, we're going to fix a bug that someone noticed, and we're going to clean up the code a little bit. This will be the last bug fixing and refactoring lesson before we move on to the unit test lesson. The bug was with the isCompleted property in the player's quest data grid. When the player completed a quest, it didn't automatically update in the UI. That's because the property did not have any code behind it to do the property change notification. So we need to add that in. And while we're cleaning up the property change notification there, we're also going to take advantage of the caller member name attribute, something we can add to our property change notification function so it automatically detects the property that's raising the notification. And we're also going to eliminate some unnecessary setters on the properties because we only ever want to set some of these values when we instantiate the objects. The objects should never change anywhere else in the program. So if we get rid of the set, then that makes it so we can never accidentally change that value somewhere else in the program. The first thing we need to do is modify the base notification class in the engine project. Up here on line 2, we need to add using system.runtime.compiler services. And then on line 10, we need to add this left bracket caller member name, right bracket, and then add the equals double quotes. This caller member name attribute will look and see what called this onPropertyChange function and try to get its name. In this case, the only thing that should be calling onPropertyChange is going to be a property setter. So if we have a property, let's say current monster, that gets changed and the setter calls onPropertyChanged, this will give us the value of the property that actually called it, current monster. So this way we don't need to explicitly pass in the name of the property, current monster. It can detect it. We do need to leave this in as a parameter that can be passed because sometimes when we change a property, like the current location, we have to raise notification changed events for other properties, like has location to north, has location to east, because those values also change whenever the current location changes. When we modify the other classes, it might become a little more obvious exactly what's happening here. Next, we need to modify the quest status class. This is the one where the bug was noticed. And before, isCompleted just had a get and set for it. It was an auto property, and it wasn't raising a property change notification, so that's why it never got updated in the UI. So now we create a backing variable, this underscore isCompleted variable, and on line 14 we call onPropertyChanged with no parameter. That's because when it goes to the onPropertyChange function, it's going to look for the caller member name, which in this case is going to be the isCompleted property, and it's going to use isCompleted as the property name parameter. We could, if we wanted to, still have name of isCompleted, and that would work, but we just want to make the code a little bit cleaner and get rid of anything extra, so I'm going to go with this pattern for most of our other code. And we're also going to change line 7 where we have the auto property for player quest. Before we had get and set, but the only time this property should ever be set is on the constructor when we pass in the quest and we set the player quest property. So we're going to remove the set, and now no one can ever reset the player quest property on a quest status object. This is just something to make it a little bit safer, so 6 months from now if we change a program we don't accidentally start resetting values for a property that should never really change a value. And this is something we're going to do pretty much everywhere we can. So there's a good chance I'll miss a few spots, but we'll clean up any extra ones along the way. Next we'll modify the GameItem class, and in here all we're going to do is get rid of the sets on all the properties, because again these should only ever be set when we construct the GameItem object. Next we'll go into the item quantity class and get rid of the sets on line 5 and 6 for the two properties there. Then we'll go into the living entity class. Here we're going to modify all of the onPropertyChanged calls to just have no parameters, to do the parameterless version, because it's going to pass in the name, so we don't really need to do name of name anymore. And we're going to do that on lines 24, on line 34 for current hit points, on 44 for maximum hit points, on 54 for the gold, and on line 64 for the player's level. We're also going to remove the sets on line 68 and 70 for the inventory and grouped inventory properties, because those should never be reset. We're going to change some of the values in there, but we're never going to actually put in a new observable collection of game items or grouped inventory items into that property. We're just going to modify the existing collections. Next, we'll go into the location class and the world class. Previously, we didn't have a constructor for the location class. We just instantiated it with the normal kind of default constructor and then set the individual properties. But since we don't want to have our setters on the properties, because they're never going to change after we create the location object the first time, now we need to add a constructor and pass in the values as parameters. So here, lines 22 through 29, I've got the new constructor with the parameters, and then we set the properties to the parameter values. That lets us get rid of the setters on lines 9 through 13, our properties up there. And we can also get rid of the setter for the quest available here and the monsters here properties. But we are going to leave the trader here property setter in place, because the way we construct this, we instantiate a location object and then later on we add in a trader. It's kind of a two-step process. For right now, I want to keep it as a two-step process, so we'll leave the trader here setter in place. And since we added a location constructor, we need to go into the world class and change the add location function so that it uses the location constructor and passes in the parameters, where it used to construct a kind of an empty location object and then set the properties on it individually. Now we're going to construct the location object with all its properties here on lines 12 and 13. Next, we'll go into the monster class and get rid of the setters on the properties on lines 5, 6, and 7, and on line 9. For step 8, we go into monster encounter, and we remove the set from the monster ID property on line 5. We're going to leave the setter for the chance of encountering property, because we actually can reset that in our factory method. That's something we have in place in case you accidentally try to add a monster to a location twice, then we just reset the chance of encountering. That's something we may want to fix in the future, but for right now, I don't want to change the factories too much. I know we're going to modify the factories eventually when we start reading in all the data from a text file, so I don't want to start modifying them now just to do them again in 2 more lessons. Then we go into the player class, and we're going to change lines 21 and 32 to just call onPropertyChanged without a parameter, since the onPropertyChanged function is now smart enough to know which property called it. And on line 38, for the quests property, we're going to get rid of the setter. For step 10, we're going to modify the quest class and get rid of the setters for all the properties from lines 7 through 15. Next, we're going to modify the weapons class and get rid of the 2 setters we have for minimum damage and maximum damage. And finally, we'll go to the engine view models game session class, and we will get rid of the set on the current world property. And we're going to go to line 50 for current location. We used to have onPropertyChanged name of current location, but the OnPropertyChanged now knows what called it, so we can just have this as our parameter list call to OnPropertyChanged. This will raise the notification for the current location. We still need to have the name of for all the has location properties, lines 51 through 54, because we're not calling the OnPropertyChanged function from those properties. So we need to pass in a specific name here. But on line 50, the one for current location, we can just make that parameterless. And we'll do the same things on line 84 for the current monster property, and on line 96 for the current trader property. And as always, we'll want to build this and make sure that our changes all worked. And you can run the game, and if you want, you can set the tab down here in the lower left to the quest and fight a bunch of snakes until you eventually reach the point where you can complete the quest, and you can see that the done for clear the herb garden changes automatically because now the property changed event for is completed is being raised. In the description below the video, I'll have a link to the source code and the lesson on my site, and if you have any questions, you can leave them there. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, and hopefully I'll get some of these lessons out more often. I just started my new business at the beginning of the year, and that's been taking 100% of my focus, so I haven't been able to do much with the lessons, but I'm going to try to work a little bit better balance and see how that goes. So hopefully the next lesson will come out probably next week. Thanks.